Welcome to the second part of our presentation, the other side of the story, why Tibet was, is, and will always be a part of China. The first part of the presentation contains general information about Tibet and also tells you who is Dalai Lama. And in the second part, we'll continue our journey and to show you how Dalai Lama changed from a religious term into a political one. And also, we'll see if there's a period of time in history that Tibet was really quote-unquote independent. So let's continue. As we're entering into the 18th century, it is more and more obvious that Tibet has become a part of China. The year was 1721, and Dalai Lama VII went to Beijing and met with Emperor Kangxi at that time, who was one of the greatest emperors in Chinese history, and Dalai Lama agreed that Tibet was a part of China, and this event was well documented in history. So there's really no doubt that in Qing dynasty, Tibet was part of China. 30 years later, the emperor of China is Qianlong, who is the grandson of the Emperor Kangxi we just talked about. And Dalai Lama went to Beijing for the second time and met with Emperor Qianlong. And please pay attention to this event because Emperor Qianlong granted Dalai Lama the role of political leader of Tibet. So this is the first time really in history that Dalai Lama becomes both the spiritual, religious, and political leader of Tibet. At that time, the connection between Tibet and the central government, which is the Qing Empire, was very, very tight. For example, 6 years later, Dalai Lama VII passed away, so Emperor Qianlong appointed a Tibetan governor as the temporary political leader of Tibet. As we talked about before, the term Dalai Lama is a system. It's a lineage of leadership succession. And so the time when the prior generation of Dalai Lama passed away is the same time when the system continues and search for the new generation. And a year later, Dalai Lama VIII was identified, and in the year of 1781, Emperor Qianlong bestowed Dalai Lama VIII the title of both political and religious leader of Tibet. And so going forward, when we talk about Dalai Lama, the political part and religious part never get separated again. Unfortunately, the following 4 generations of Dalai Lama, none of them has passed the age of 20. But the central government, which is the Qing Empire, was heavily involved in all the aspects of political activity in Tibet, and especially in the transition periods between generations and generations. So there's absolutely no doubt, in my opinion, as is shown in history, that Tibet was a part of China in Qing dynasty. In late 19th century, when Tibet was invaded by British Empire, even though Qing dynasty was not as strong as before, Dalai Lama XIII still fled to inner China to seek for protection. And later, when he returned to Tibet, he was forced by the British Empire to start to cut off the connection between Tibet and the central government. So from that point on, for the next about 30 years, the connection between Tibet and the central government was not as obvious as before. And that's really the start of a period of time when now a small group of people refer to as the independent Tibet. But the fact is, even after the falling of Qing dynasty and during World War I and World War II, which is the weakest and the darkest period of time in Chinese history, all major countries in the world, that includes United States, British Empire, Germany, you name it, still continue to consent that Tibet is indeed a part of China. So as you can see in history, both from political or diplomatic point of view, there's really no such a thing of independent Tibet. It's always part of China. And also during this period of time, Dalai Lama XIII passed away, and Dalai Lama XIV was identified and become the leader of Tibet. These days, some of the protests make people think that quote-unquote independent Tibet is free Tibet. From a religious point of view, maybe, but from a human rights perspective, the answer is definitely no. And some people refer to the 30 years between the falling of Qing dynasty and the end of World War II as the independent period of time of Tibetan history. And as we just show you, that period of time, first of all, is definitely not independent, and second of all, which I'm going to show you, is really not free. And the reason why it was not free is really because of this political system and how it works. As I showed you before, Tibet was one of the only regions in the world that was still ruled by religion in early 20th century. The political system at that time, I would call it the religious leadership and serf system, which is a combination of superstition and slavery. There's a little bit difference between slaves and serfs, although they share a lot of similarities. For example, serfs' children, when they were born, they automatically become serfs, and they can be traded as commodity, and also when religious sacrifice is required, they can be killed and their body parts will be used in religious ceremonies. And the financial system was also controlled by religious leaders, and as you can imagine, the interest rate of loans were very, very high. So even though you're independent, you are not a serf to start with, when you get into a loan, you will never run away from it, and you will become serf at the very end. And remember, when you become serf, your children, your grandchildren, and your great-great-great-grandchildren will automatically become serfs too, and there's no way that they could run away from it. So I think, personally, it's pretty ironic and pathetic that some of the protesters refer to this period of time, quote-unquote independent and quote-unquote free, because from a human rights perspective, it really couldn't be worse. And from a religious perspective, maybe they have more freedom. However, please keep in mind, they really don't know there's another option out there, which is called democracy. I know we have talked about a lot of things in this part of this presentation, but several things you can take away from this is, first of all, there was really no such a thing as independent Tibet in history, and second of all, the independent Tibet that some people are referring to these days was a horrible place to be. But all these things are about to change as the People's Republic of China restored the sovereignty of Tibet in the year of 1951. As soon as the full sovereignty of Tibet was restored, the connection between Tibetan government and central government became tight again. And the Communist Party urged the Tibetan government to start the political reform in Tibet, which worked pretty well in the beginning because the central government didn't set any specific timelines. As you can see in this picture, Dalai Lama XIV, he was still young at that time, went to Beijing in the year of 1954 and met with Mao Zedong, Chairman Mao, to discuss all these political issues. And again, at the very beginning, it worked pretty well. And obviously, this story did not have a happy ending. And if you wonder what made Dalai Lama fled to India in the year of 1959, and why Chinese think that Tibet will always be a part of China, please stay with me and continue to part 3 of this presentation. Thank you very much.